So this account of Peter's attempt to walk on storm-tossed waves to meet Jesus on the sea comes in the middle of a series of events during Jesus' ministry. And this series of events, as told by Matthew in chapter 14, offers us glimpses of various kinds of faith at work amid the challenges of discipleship. And this series of faith actions and non-actions does not set up one kind of faith as superior, stronger, or better than the other. It just simply gives us glimpses of ways faithful people can act. The acts of my sermon as I was going through that book seem to land themselves into the following categories: the faith of Jesus, the faith of the crowd, the faith of the disciples, and then there's the faith of Peter. So let's look at the faith of Jesus first. He is, of course, the very first example of faith we're given in Matthew, and it's that of Jesus himself. At the opening of the chapter, we are told of the beheading of John the Baptist. And of course, when Jesus learns about this, he has a deep and profound reaction. No doubt he sees his own fate in what's happened to his cousin John. His faith in his Father leads him to seek solitude and prayer so he can gather strength to face the challenges that will ultimately cost him his life. However, on his way to solitude and prayer, just like any other time we're in traffic trying to get somewhere in a hurry, screeching halt, because a crowd of people were seeking solace and assurance from Jesus as well. And his heart, of course, goes out to this crowd. And his faith, the very same faith which drives him to seek solitude, to gather strength for the rigors ahead, this very same faith will not permit him, even just this one time, to duck out of the crowd. This is the faith of Jesus. When confronted with a lethal threat to everything he stands for, he goes immediately to solitude and prayer, as I hope we all do. Right to God, his Father, our Father. And even when his journey to solitude is interrupted by the crowd and its needs, he stops and ministers to them. And his ministry, even at this low point, works miracles, literally. The next episode in this 14th chapter is his feeding 5,000 men, not to mention women and children, as Pastor Connie mentioned last week. He did all that with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and they had 12 baskets of the meal left over. So Jesus ministers to the crowd first, and then he resumes his own journey towards solitude, where he can draw strength from the time that he spends with God, his Father. Strength that takes him resolutely, step by step, forward to what he knows will be. And then there is the faith of the crowd. The feeding of the 5,000 men, plus the women and children, shows us another expression of faith, and that is the faith of the crowd. That faith, simple, very basic. Something tells the people to look to Jesus for the guidance they need. They follow him, won't let him go, and they follow him even into the wilderness where there is no food or shelter trusting him to feed them. That's a lot of trust, if you ask me. And then we have the faith of the disciples. And this brings us to our focus for today. The faith of Peter and faith of 11 other disciples. The 12 of them are with Jesus, assisting him as he ministers to and feeds that crowd. And then finally, the crowd's been fed literally and spiritually. And Jesus finally sends the 12 to cross to the other side of the sea, while he stays behind to dismiss the crowd before he continues to his own place of solitude. The disciples press on in the boat, but yep, you guessed it. This is the part of Matthew's story when they find themselves in danger on the storm-tossed sea. And Jesus gathers strength during this time alone with God. Wind and waves don't even slow him down as he sets off walking on the sea, we're told, to catch up with the disciples. They see him walking on the water in the middle of the stormy night. And understandably, they're terrified because they think he's a ghost. And they cry out. But Jesus tells them, take heart. Don't worry, it's me. It is I. Don't be afraid. And right here, right there, we see the faith of the disciples. Most of them, anyway. Apparently, Jesus' words, his voice alone is enough to reassure them. They don't need anything more than that. They don't need to do anything to prove that it is indeed Jesus and that he is coming to join them. Hearing his voice, having him speak to them, initiates that simple, straightforward faith. It's enough. They take him at his word. They trust. But like I said, then there is the faith of Peter. As I said, everyone had complete faith but good old Peter. The faith of Peter is not satisfied with simple trust or faith. Peter apparently is one of those that learns by doing. You know, the hot stove thing. Burns, it's hot. Thus feeling he has to act, even when he's not specifically asked to do anything. There is no command from Jesus to the disciples, hey, it's me, come on out. Nothing's going on out here. Come on out. The water's fine. See for yourselves. Yeah, come on out. Join me. Let's see how much faith you have. Now we know Jesus says nothing of the sort. He just tells them it is he, and he walks out to join them. And for 11 disciples, that is enough, but not Peter. He is compelled to do something, even if it's the wrong something. Peter's faith drives him to it. But Peter's faith includes just a little bit of doubt. Lord, if it is you, he calls out to Jesus. Lord, if it is you? Seriously, Lord, if it is you? Well, Peter, who else do you think it is out here on the water walking? Who else could it possibly be? The 11 other disciples recognized Jesus as simply by hearing him speak. But to Peter, somehow, he seems different, terrifying, and otherworldly, like a frightening visitor from beyond the dead. I mean, Peter is pretty sure that it's Jesus, and his faith drives him to action. If it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And of course, Jesus' response is, come. Why? The main reason seems to be that Peter needs to be reassured that it is indeed Jesus. And why does Peter want to join Jesus out on the water? Jesus is already coming to Peter in the boat. Why does Peter want to go out and join him before he gets there? Does he want magical powers? Does he want to set himself up above other disciples? Is he still not sure that it is Jesus? Nope. None of that. That's not what it is. You see, Peter is certain that it is Jesus. He just doesn't believe what his eyes are seeing. He doesn't trust those eyes. He's certain that it's Jesus, and his request demonstrates a real faith that Jesus can somehow give him what he needs to walk out to him on the surface of the water. I'll bet in his brain it's saying something like, all right, if this is what following Jesus requires, then let me get on with it. Let me dive right into the deep end of the pool. And the other 11 disciples, you ask, it seems like their faith doesn't require them to try to join Jesus out there on the water, but Peter's does. He steps out of the boat and starts walking. He starts walking out okay, but then his senses seems to come back to him, and he begins to realize what he is doing, and he gets really, really frightened and starts to sink. And of course he cries out to Jesus, Jesus, save me, save me. And Jesus says to Peter, as he's reaching out, you just have a teeny tiny bit of faith. Why did you doubt? It is specifically Peter's faith and not that of the others, which is called out as being too little. The faith of the others is sufficient. And of course, we know that Jesus is and has demonstrated the very model of faith. This passage from Matthew is part of a larger story about faith and where it leads. Number one, it is about Jesus' faith and how it leads him to seek time alone with God, but not at the expense of those who need him. And number two, it is about the faith of the crowd who follow Jesus wherever he goes, trusting that he will feed them literally and spiritually. And number three, it is about the faith of the 11 who trust Jesus' reassuring words. Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. And number four, it is about the faith of Peter, who trusts in Jesus to give him the ability to do the things he could never, ever do on his own, and then rescue him when he fails. And all this happens beside or on the sea, some of it even in the middle of a raging storm, in an environment with widespread hunger, literal hunger, spiritual deep hunger. This passage demonstrates different kinds of faith. Now, it can be argued that the faith of the crowd is weak because they want signs, and some of those in the crowd will, after all, be the ones that turn on Jesus in the end. About the disciples, the committed followers of Jesus, us. This passage does not show Peter as some kind of exemplar of stronger faith. Peter's faith is no better or worse, no stronger than anyone else's in the proverbial boat. His actions as much as anything, where faith goes wrong sometimes. Through his actions, we see that acting is not sufficient in and of itself. So he begins to think. His action, his commitment will not carry him. He needs faith. We need faith. And he hasn't got enough. And sometimes that can happen to us too. Peter is the one whom Jesus rebukes, the only one Jesus rebukes for having little faith. True, we might say at least he got out of the boat, but just getting out of the boat got him nothing. Basically, it was a useless, meaningless action. Jesus does not require him or anybody else to just get out of the boat. No, Jesus is already coming to the boat. Why make a big show of going out to him? Seriously, who is this really about? If we are to hold up anyone as a model of faith in this passage, let it be Jesus. The summary execution of John the Baptist leaves his faith shaken. So he does what we should all do. The first thing he does is he goes straight to God in prayer. Straight to God. But even with his faith shaken and trembling, he interrupts his journey to solitude to minister to those who need him, those 5,000 plus men, women, children. It is this faith, the faith of Jesus, which is our model. Maybe we can see our own faith in that of the crowd or of the 11 or maybe even Peter. Which faith type is yours? Own it. Practice it. Let it take you through the storm and strife straight to Jesus and to the new day he promises. Hallelujah. Amen.